So the Ottomans had landed in northwest Anatolia. They had been transformed from being the Kai tribe in the countryside, led by a Tughril, to being a Beylik led by Osman, the horseback warrior who had managed to take several small towns in the vicinity of his capital, Soghut. Unfortunately, Osman died during the siege of Bursa, which was successful, but he was succeeded by his son called Orhan. The question is, how would Orhan deal with the reality of leadership, with the reality of having to rule now a major urban center, but also having to live up to the legacy of his father? Let's find out. In 1326, there was a seamless transition of power from Osman to Orhan, and this would turn out to be the exception to the norm for the Ottomans. As soon as Orhan became the emir, the leader of the Beylik, he offered to split the empire with his elder brother Aladdin, but Aladdin rejected this because he knew that this would weaken the Ottomans. So he was happy to play second fiddle to his younger brother and adopt the role of policymaker and advisor. His official title was Grand Vizier, and this is a bit like a vice president or a deputy prime minister, but not quite the same. But he became the first of 272 Grand Viziers that the Ottomans would have over the next 600 years. Orhan was the man who brought the brawn, the zeal, the ambition of a Gazi warrior, whereas his elder brother Aladdin was a strategist and a policymaker, but together they were a lethal combination, because one of them would win the war on the battlefield and the other one would win the hearts and the minds after the battle with his policy making. The Ottoman Beylik was growing and fast. Having been transformed from the Kai tribe in a rural setting to the Ottoman Beylik now in an urban setting, Orhan would come to rule a very different population to him, different in ethnicity and different in religion, and therefore he would need a different approach to ruling. He would adopt the standard Islamic approach when ruling non-Muslim subjects, which is not to force them to convert to Islam, but to tax them, protect them, and allow them to practice their religion. They were of the Greek ethnicity and they were of the Orthodox branch of Christianity. While the Greeks of Bursa were living under the Byzantine Empire, they lived under a state which was in chaos, had a lot of civil wars and lots of problems. And they used to pay high taxes, and they were living in an outpost rather than the capital. Under the Ottoman Beylik, the Greeks were now living in the capital of a state, and they paid lower taxes because they paid the jizya tax. So in many ways, the Greeks were much better off under the Ottomans than they were under the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople. Many of them got integrated into Ottoman society, and a classic example of this is the army general who led the Greeks of Bursa in defending against the Ottomans against the siege of Bursa. He quickly was integrated into the Ottoman military elites. At the same time, Greeks were learning from Turks. They learned about administration, how to run a city, about architecture, about art. So in many ways, the Greeks were shaping what it meant to be Ottoman, i.e. Osmanli, people of Osman, just as much as Turks were. And a new social order was developing, which was a blend of the two. It wasn't a case that the conquerors were dictating to the conquered, but rather the Greeks were protected, copied, and valued. And with that, it's very easy to see how it was a very smooth transition from being a Byzantine city to being an Ottoman city. Most citizens just want to live their life and practice their faith. But after that, the next most important thing is being able to work and earn some money and look after your family. And for that, economics is very important. And luckily for the Ottomans and Orhan, Bursa was actually on a trade route. It was actually at the end of the Silk Route. And thanks to the economic policies of Aladdin, the prosperity of the city only increased. caravans would come from far and wide to places like this caravanserai here in Bursa, and trade their goods. And the silk, which was manufactured here in Bursa of very high quality, was sold in the markets. People earned a good living and they were able to pay taxes to Orhan. What that also meant was the Ottomans could now start minting their own coins. So Orhan and his brother Aladdin had succeeded in creating a prosperous, tolerant, multi-religious, multi-ethnic capital city. Although many Greeks inhabited the city of Bursa, Islam was still the worldview which governed society's affairs. In particular, the Ottoman concept of deen and devlet, which means religion and the state, which the Ottomans saw as two symbiotic concepts, one needing the other for either one of them to work properly and for the society to run correctly. For this he would need lots of Muslim scholars, so he imported imams and theologians from around the Muslim world, in particular from Persia and from Central Asia. Other people started to migrate from Anatolia, other Turks, and started to become Osmanli, people of Osman. And very slowly he was building a very, very credible city. And this is attested to in the words of the world's most famous traveller, Ibn Battuta, who when he came to Bursa, when Orhan was the ruler, said that Orhan was the greatest of all the Turkmen kings in terms of wealth, land and military capabilities. Of note in this time period was that the Turkish language was just a spoken language. The language of the court and the language of administration was actually Persian. So a people of a Turkic ethnicity, believing in a religion which emanated from Arabia, carrying a culture which was Persian, had taken over a Greek city, and they had made a civilization which was very unique, with Islam as its overarching ideology and living heartbeat. Very different to that man over there, but more on him in the last episode. Now that Orhan had solidified his realm, it was time for the Gazi warrior traits which he had inherited from his father to come out. To his south, to his east, to his west, he was surrounded by Turkic beylik, so he didn't want to interfere over there. But to his north, he had a crumbling Byzantine empire, so the answer was simple: move north. So in 1329, he took his troops and he defeated the Byzantines very close to the Bosphorus Straits and managed to take all the land up to the Bosphorus so he could see Constantinople across the straits. The result of this victory was he'd taken all the land in northwestern Anatolia, and the remaining Greek cities within northwestern Anatolia were completely cut off from the Byzantines. So in 1331 he put the city of Nicaea under siege and took it, and a few years later he took another city called Nicomedia after a short siege. And with that, Orhan Gazi had completed the transformation of Greek, Christian, Orthodox ruled Asia Minor into Turkic, Muslim ruled Anatolia, which the Seljuks had started a few hundred years prior to that. Interestingly, the city that he took, Nicaea, 1,000 years prior to this, the Byzantine emperor, the famous one called Constantine I, convened a famous council called the Council of Nicaea. And in this council, it was decided what Christian orthodoxy should be. And as a result, the Trinity was decided to be the correct belief. And any Unitarian Christians, people who didn't believe that Jesus was part of a Trinity, were sidelined and called heretics. And after that, they were attacked. And that's had huge ramifications to this day, because Trinitarian belief is the most common Christian belief by far. However, what Constantine the Great did not anticipate was that 1,000 years later, in the very city where he convened this council to make Trinitarian belief orthodox, it would be taken by Unitarians. But this time, it wasn't Christian Unitarians, it was Muslim Unitarians. In 1345, there was some problem brewing in the Karasi Beylik, which was the Beylik which bordered the Ottoman Beylik to its west. The Bey of the Beylik, the prince of the principality, had died, and his two sons were fighting over the throne. And for Orhan to intervene here offensively against a friendly Muslim state would have been something that was frowned upon under Islamic law, so he would need an excuse, and he got his excuse. He said he was going to intervene and be a bringer of peace and stability. And if you've been watching the news over the last 20 years, every time a major power invades a lesser country, the excuse they always give is we're bringers of peace and stability. So not much has changed over the centuries. By the end of the civil war, one of the brothers had died and the other was in the custody of Orhan, and he managed to annex the whole Beylik. This was very significant because he now bordered Europe at 2 points. The first we've already talked about, that was in the east, that was at the Bosphorus Straits where he could see Constantinople. And the second now was in the west at the Straits of Gallipoli. Europe now was just a stone throw away. Meanwhile, the Byzantine emperor was having some problems with his co-religionists. The states to the north of him were the Serbian Empire and the Bulgarian Empire, and they had no problems in attacking the Byzantines at times and causing them problems. So the emperor needed some help, and he turned to none other than Orhan, a Muslim ruler, and he agreed that he would marry his daughter called Theodora to Orhan on the proviso that Orhan would help him against these Serbians and these Bulgarians. And Orhan saw this as an opportunity, not only to get another wife, but also to stake his claim in the politics and what was going on in southeastern Europe, what the Ottomans were called Rumeli. In 1352, the emperor in Constantinople was having some problems again. Someone else was trying to oust him with the help of the states in Europe. And Orhan sent over 10,000 troops to prevent this from happening. So the Ottomans had gone from a pesky, irritant force in the Anatolian countryside for the Byzantines to being their allies and being dealt with on a par with them, and now also they were family with them. So the geopolitical scene was starting to favor the Ottomans. But then all of a sudden, geological acts of God were also starting to favor the Ottomans. You see, on the Gallipoli Peninsula in 1354 there was an earthquake, and it forced the local Greeks to move out of the peninsula, and Orhan took the opportunity to move in his Turkish people, and the Byzantine emperor was okay with that. 650 years prior to this, a man called Tariq ibn Ziyad had led Umayyad troops and entered Spain, then became known as Al-Andalus, to start the first Muslim presence in Europe. That was in the west. Orhan became the first Muslim ruler to enter Europe from the east, but on this occasion he had done it with the blessing of the emperor in Constantinople. Another incident highlights the cooperation between the Byzantines and the Ottomans. Theodora and Orhan had a son called Halil, Shehzadi Halil, which means Prince Halil, and he was captured by some Genoese pirates, and his granddad, the Byzantine emperor, agreed to pay the ransom to have Prince Halil, Shehzadi Halil, returned back to Orhan and Theodora in Bursa. The Byzantine emperor probably thought that if Halil was to succeed Orhan, then he would be favorable to the Byzantine Empire because they shared some blood. The only problem is Orhan preferred his other son, who was called Murad. Orhan got to the age of 80 years and he was quite tired of all these campaigns and all the difficulties of ruling, so he deputized a lot to his son Murad, who ran the empire. But eventually Orhan Gazi would die, and he's buried here right next to his father Osman Gazi. He'd overseen a huge transition of the Kai tribe taking over their first urban center, Bursa, having now ruled a major city which was multi-ethnic and multi-religious, and he'd also overseen them becoming a power not only in Anatolia but also in Rumeli. So he had fully lived up to his father's expectations. The only question is, would his son Murad live up to Orhan's expectations? To find out, make sure you watch my next episode on the history of the Ottomans from Ertugrul to Ataturk. Salam.